The call of McKay's is real. If you're let loose in there, it's a dangerous thing, especially if you're a bookworm with just some spare change in your pocket. If you do, you're going to need a U-Haul.
Hello and welcome back to this damn full idealistic crusade. In this video, I want to go over my book haul for the past month of May. I'd like to do this every once in a while when I come across really notable finds in used bookstores and just whenever I find something in the wild. I've done this sometimes in the past for certain Hardy Boys finds and also when I did the McKay's Road Trip Challenge and got a ton of in-store credit. So in the past month, I was able to go back to McKay's on 2 different occasions and actually spend some time going through the shelves. And then I also visited our local Half Price Books location. So everything you see in this video was purchased at 2 of my local stores across 3 different visits, and most of it was under $1. In fact, most of it was under 75 cents. And I always bring things to trade in because, as anyone with a sizable book or physical media collection knows, space is at a premium, and so I try to part out or trade in things whenever I can in order to at least have some degree of flow and freeing up at least a tiny amount of space, which will then be filled, of course, with more books and physical media items. So I'll start with the stuff I picked up at McKay's, and for those who aren't aware, McKay's is a regional chain of stores that's been around for, I think, at least 30 years, but I refer to it jokingly as the black hole of physical media because it's a giant store where you simply never know what will turn up. And if you were to visit once a week for a month, the inventory would change so much in each weekly trip that you could just go there constantly and there'd always be something different and new. And especially for books, their prices are so low on most things that if you're a bookworm and you have any spare change in your pocket, or especially if you trade some stuff in and get some trade credit, you're pretty much a goner. I can go in there with $5 or $10 in my pocket, and if I'm going to certain areas where there's a lot of cheaper books, you can come out with full bags or a box. I've gone in there before and traded in a box of books and come out with another box of books. So it's a dangerous place for me to go in terms of trying to not come away with a ton of physical media or books. But you do have to literally dig through the massive store, and they will sell books for as low as a nickel. And they also have a free book section at the front with all of their items that were rejected from trade-ins. That's what they do with those. So it's actually a nice way to recycle books and get them into somebody else's hands if they're books that aren't really worth anything. So everything that I'm going to go over that I picked up at McKay's was under $1.50. That was the most expensive thing that I actually picked up, were some items priced at $1.50. But most of this stuff was less than $1, and actually most of that was less than 75 cents. So in addition to the trade credit that I had, I did not spend that much. So this is, like I said, it's a dangerous place if you're a book lover and you don't have a lot of space, and especially if you have relatives or family members who already make fun of your book purchasing habits, even if you're a voracious reader. This will just give them more fuel for those jokes and criticisms, because this place it's unlike any bookstore I've ever been to. It's about volume and turnover in a way that makes it completely unique among bookstores. So if you're ever in the Southeast region or in Tennessee or around the Nashville store, I can't recommend it highly enough. Just be aware you'll be probably filling up boxes or your car trunk. I also like to joke that sometimes you just need to rent a U-Haul truck and back it up to the front door and load it with all of your physical media purchases. So I'll start with the series books that I picked up, and this is where I really like to go most of all to look for Hardy Boys editions, because they have them come in regularly, but typically the condition is all over the place and you never know what's going to be in there. But the pricing is generally quite low, so you can actually, if you're patient and you go back a lot, you can build most of a whole collection over time and not spend a lot of money, or at least well below eBay prices. So I picked up 2 editions I needed in the Undercover Brothers series, which is book 20, Feeding Frenzy, and then book 25, Double Trouble, which is book 1 of the Double Danger trilogy. And with McKay's visits over time, I've been able to chip away and pick up most of the Undercover Brothers series that I missed out on when they were new. For the original series, I did pick up some really nice condition picture covers that were just so, well, really pristine, pretty much, that I couldn't resist. So they had a very early printing of Jungle Pyramid, and as you can see, this is, it looks like it's never been read. And it's got the wonderful cover, the spine's in perfect shape, and of course the back book listing only lists up to Jungle Pyramid, so this does seem like a first edition. But as you can see, the actual pages themselves show no marking, no signs of age wear. I mean, just a little bit of wear on the bottom corners, which is to be expected. So this was just so minty looking. I just couldn't pass this up for so dirt cheap of a price, and especially since Jungle Pyramid is one of my favorite books in the latter parts of the canon. This is one of the best of the last books in the series. Dang it. They also had the same condition for this copy of the Phantom Freighter revised text. It's not the earliest printing of this, as it does have the number added, but still, it's in absolutely perfect shape. It's, of course, got the Helvetica font and rear cover of the later 70s printings and lists up to Wishmaster's Key. But again, as you can see, it's in practically unread mint condition. And since I'm such a fan of Nappy's artwork, I've always wanted to get minty vintage copies of all the picture covers that I only have in the flashlight edition. So my only copy of the revised text with the Nappy artwork was the flashlight version. So I just really wanted to always get this in the picture cover edition, but didn't expect to find a just pristine copy like this for so cheap. Now, McKay's does just mix in all editions of Hardy Boys regardless of era. So in the same shelf and at the same pricing level, they will have picture covers, flashlight editions, the modern black spine penguin hardcovers, but also vintage editions, including tweed copies without the dust jackets. Occasionally you find a really beat up vintage edition from the 40s, but also all sorts of picture covers of original text, and even the Applewood replicas from time to time. So it's always, every edition you can think of is just put in the same shelf. But every once in a while, you actually see a vintage edition that even has a protective cover. So they had this really lovely condition copy of What Happened at Midnight with the second artwork, and it's actually in a protective jacket, but the actual dust jacket is in immaculate shape. It just has, you know, a slight bit of general age wear, but this is far better condition than the copies I have of What Happened at Midnight in this particular edition. So I couldn't believe this was on the shelf. And as you can see, even the pages are relatively free of wear. Again, it's just some slight age-related tanning, but I mean, this is amazing for the condition compared to what you usually find these editions in. Inside, there's the brown and white end papers, and the dust jacket is slightly price clipped, but otherwise it's perfect, and it lists up to Desert Giant, which puts this as a very early 1960s copy. Here is the title page with the front piece artwork, and as you can see, the pages look fantastic, and there's no major age-related foxing of the pages either, so I just couldn't believe this was there. So this was absolutely fantastic. However, this is not the best Hardy Boys find I had on these trips, which is amazing because this is already an amazing find for less than $2. They had this picture cover edition of the Flickering Torch mystery with the original text and the second artwork, which I do already have a copy of, but this is in very good shape and was extraordinarily cheap. And of course, it lists up to Aztec Warrior, which puts it at about a 1964 printing. The pages are in really nice shape, although the original owner not only wrote his name, but actually stamped it in several places. But the reason why I wanted to pick this up is because it has a particular printing variation, which I'm sure is an error. I knew it existed, but I've never actually seen this in the wild in terms of this type of variant. And that is when you open the book and you look for some of the iconic end papers, you don't get any. They're blank. So this is a particular printing variation that happens on some runs of the books, randomly it seems, but there are no end papers. So that's why I picked this up. I don't often try to collect the errored versions or variations or special versions unless it's like this, where I stumble across a really nice copy for very cheap, and I can't resist, because it's not like you find blank end paper versions every day in mint condition for less than $2. But the real find, and the one that I still can't believe that I found for, again, the sticker price on these was $1.50, and with the trade credit I had, it was of course even less. And depending on how you allocate that, you could actually say that some of these were then free. But they had this copy of The House on the Cliff, and of course it looks like any other picture cover version of the revised text with the Rudy Nappy artwork. It's even got the same owner stamp on the bottom and on the inside, which is kind of neat because it's such an impressive name that I guess they felt the need to make a stamp of it. And the pages look really clean, and the overall condition is excellent. As you can see, it's a later printing from into the 1970s, and that's important because this is a very special one-off printing that is extraordinarily rare. And the reason is actually quite obvious when you look at the top of the book, because instead of the iconic blue ink that was always used on the Hardy Boys editions, for this one print run, which is supposed to be about 1973, they're actually red. And they only did this for the first 3 books, so Tower Treasure, House on the Cliff, and Secret of the Old Mill. And it's said that House on the Cliff is actually the hardest to find of the 3 with the red ink tops. It's unknown exactly why this was done, but it was for basically this one printing in 1973, and they don't seem to have made a whole lot of them. So you practically never see these, and I just seen photos online. I knew they existed, but I never expected to find one, let alone the House on the Cliff with the red ink top. So this was a complete shock, and easily, out of all these fantastic book bargains that you'll see in this video, this is the one that completely blew my mind, especially since it was only $1.50 to begin with. So this is my most astounding Hardy Boys find in a very long time. I've never seen one of the red ink tops in the wild before. I never expected to. So this is just mind-blowing still. For Nancy Drew, I picked up a number of editions, either upgrading books that I didn't have in good condition or chipping away at trying to collect the various series. Now, if you didn't believe me that McKay's will just mix in Applewood replicas with the other editions, well, they actually had a really nice copy of the Applewood Secret of Redgate Farm, which is the replica of the original printing of the original text. It's in really wonderful shape. No major problems. The only thing is that another bookstore wrote their pricing in what looks like a red marker on the back, but it's very small. But Applewood editions, of course, they were only able to do certain numbers of each series, and they were done primarily in the 1990s. And once they lost the license and stopped printing them, they've become harder and harder to get. Usually books like this, among the first 10 books, were the ones that were in print longer and had more print runs, so they're easier to find, but you can typically expect to pay anywhere between $10 to up to around $30 for any of the first 10 in the Applewood editions if you want them in good shape. And you really do, because these are absolutely the best replica printings, and really the only true replica printings that have been done and released officially. And they were made to last with such extreme care. And there's a reason why fans still try to collect all of them, but it is a very expensive prospect now to collect every Applewood reprint, because the later ones get more and more expensive because they simply didn't print as many. And of course, they are hardcovers replicating the original boards as well. I'm also trying to collect nice picture cover editions of the original Nancy Drew canon, so whenever I find a really nice condition copy that's at a nice affordable price, which is usually waiting to see if any might pop up at McKay's again, I basically pounce on it. So they had this nice copy of Clue of the Velvet Mask, which is book 30, in its revised text with striking Rudy Nappy artwork in really great shape, and you really want to try and find these in good condition to have the artwork and pages preserved. The spine's in nice shape, so is the rear, which goes up to Crocodile Island in the listing. As you can see, the pages are very clean. I chipped away at a digest I needed as they had volume 81, the Mardi Gras Mystery. As you can see, this is in really nice shape. It's even still got the original gloss on the cover. There's no major spine creasing or anything. The rear cover is in excellent shape. And the actual pages are clean. It's just that some digests in slightly later printings like this just were it's like they're a bit looser in their binding, so that's just how they look when you handle them. But it's one of the best conditioned digests I've managed to find in quite a while, so it's getting very difficult to find clean, good conditioned digest of the Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew. So yeah, I feel lucky whenever I find one that's cheap and in really nice shape. The same can be said for both the Nancy Drew files and the Hardy Boys case files. These are the late 80s and 1990s special series for slightly older readers that had a more mature edge and were very much designed to cash in on the adventure series paperback craze, particularly that started in the world of men's adventure paperbacks with the Executioner series in the 70s. So these are basically an alternate universe where everything's darker, where the stories have more adult themes, where sometimes our characters wind up using guns, there's murders. It's wonderful and glorious, and I've loved them ever since I was a kid, particularly the Hardy Boys case files. So I'm now making up for lost time and picking up the Nancy Drew files wherever I can. And so it's not often that you find really minty copies in the wild that are affordable. And on top of that, it's very hard to get any missing volumes you need. So completing a collection is very difficult. It took me many years to complete my case files collection, and I still try to upgrade copies where I can because these are small paperbacks. They were being read by, kids from the ages of 10 to 15 in the 80s and 90s, so they were not going to be kept on the shelf. They were put in pockets and in backpacks, so they got kicked around a lot. So they actually had a number of, again, seemingly unread copies, so some of these are upgrades and some of these were books that I needed. All of them were basically priced at $1, so I couldn't say no because you don't see editions of the files or case files books pop up like this every day. It's harder and harder to find them at all, and finding them in mint shape for $1, well, that just doesn't happen. So they actually had a number of the early books in the series. So here's a mint upgrade copy for me of book 2. As you can see, the series started out being so purely gloriously 80s that you can't resist it. And these books, in particular the case files, is actually where I developed my trailer voice for pulpy exploitation action adventure work. So it just screams trailer voice. So you see this and you're just like,
it's time for case 2 of the Nancy Drew files in deadly intent.
See what I mean? You kind of just have to do that. But again, the spines are perfect. The rear covers are near perfect. I mean, you just don't see them pop up like this. They had book 3, which is, of course,
Murder on Ice.
Book 4, which is, of course,
Smile and Say Murder.
Book 5,
Hit and Run Holiday.
Book 7,
Deadly Doubles.
Book 8,
2 Points to Murder.
Book 9, of course, has Nancy looking especially sassy in
False Moves.
Book 19 is
Sisters in Crime.
Book 20,
Very Deadly Yours.
Then they had book 61, which is later in the series when they had revamped the cover art design, and this was the style of the books at this point in
Sweet Revenge.
Doggone it. It's not easy to do. Oh, man. So here are all the spines, and as you can see, for books from the late 80s into the 90s, and especially since the Nancy Drew files were primarily white spines, they are much harder to get in good shape as they pick up dirt and smudges, and you basically have to keep them on the shelf and only read them occasionally to keep the spines nice and pure white. And so these are definitely the cleanest and best looking copies I've seen in a long time. The only difference is different books have slightly different variations in the paper that was used. So they all have the yellow edges, but some are darker or more brown or are less yellow. So that's always the variations you come across. But these are in absolutely perfect shape, and they were dirt cheap. But we're not done with series, because I actually managed to find a Three Investigators book in the wild. These occasionally pop up at McKay's, and typically for dirt cheap, but it's a variety of editions, usually in very, very poor condition. But Three Investigators books pop up so infrequently in the wild that finding any of them anywhere is a cause for celebration. And I'm inching closer to having at least a physical copy of every book in the original series. My goal is to have a full set of all 43 books and the spin-offs and side books, and with the initial books having their bookends with Alfred Hitchcock, as after Hitchcock's death in the 1980s, they started reprinting the books with updated bookends featuring the fictional mystery writer Hector Sebastian. They didn't actually change the books outside of that, but you do have to get earlier printings to get all of the Hitchcock versions. So they actually had one of the Scholastic reprints, which is the smaller paperback size. But as you see here, it's of course The Mystery of Monster Mountain with the beautiful artwork. It's in rather nice shape. The spine's still in good shape. And the rear is the very straightforward style of the Scholastic versions. But you occasionally will come across these. It's typically a lot harder to find vintage original first editions of the hardcovers. But what's great about the Scholastic versions is, of course, they have the Hitchcock text. So you've got the bookends featuring Alfred Hitchcock. And so this is reprinting the entirety of the original version in a nice, more pocket-sized paperback edition. But the only issue is typically these wouldn't retain the beautiful original interior illustrations of the first edition. So there are some trade-offs, but you can actually build a sizable amount of the original series collecting the Scholastic versions like this, which are all the smaller paperback sizes. So it's obviously not what most collectors are going after, but I know some people really do try to complete a whole set of the Scholastic versions, and they also feature unique artwork, sometimes just repurposing or reworking elements of the original first edition art. So this was just a nice find, and it's also an easy way to be picking up the Hitchcock versions with the original bookends. On a side note, they actually had one of the absolutely lovely Hitchcock story collections. So I can't pass these up whenever I find them. I absolutely love them because they all have unique covers and are very much in they're packaged in the style of the famous Alfred Hitchcock Presents TV introductions that he would do. So this is Alfred Hitchcock's Noose Report, and you've got this astounding illustration of Hitchcock as hangman, but also as the gallows themselves. I mean, it's just absolutely wonderful, and I was just floored finding this. But it's in excellent condition. This collection of 14 stories was first published in 1966, and this is a later reprint from 1970, but is in otherwise perfect shape. It's, of course, got the green edges of a Dell book, and it's mass market size, but Dell books are a little bit taller, so this will just stick out a bit compared to mass market size paperbacks. Whenever you find one of these Hitchcock collections, they're typically a little bit more expensive because of the covers and the collectability factor and the fact that it's got Hitchcock's name on it. But amazingly, this was a quarter. So again, that's why I'd say McKay's is amazing, because you simply never know what's going to be there, and sometimes it's absurdly cheap. Now, as I said, most of the books from McKay's that I picked up were not just less than $1, they were actually 75 cents or less. Basically, the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew editions I've gone over so far were either $1 or $1.50, and again, I had trade credit. But I have a couple Star Wars books that I picked up that were all 50 or 75 cents, so they had a pretty solid copy of Lost City of the Jedi. I do have this series in the hardcover, a collected edition, but the paperbacks, as you can see, have absolutely gorgeous Drew Struzan artwork, and this does have the Star Wars logo embossed. These were, of course, for children, and they are rather thin, and the paper use was cheaper. So when you find them, they typically have some foxing on the pages, and as you can see, there's almost always at least some spine wear and some sort of crumpling because the books were really, really thin. So this was actually one of the better ones I've seen, and I just picked it up because I wanted to eventually get all of them for the artwork, which is also wraparound. So this is the same quality level Struzan would do for the adult Star Wars novels, and he did, I think, most, if not all, of this series. So he did do the same high quality art for even the kids' books, which makes them just really nice to collect. And then these two were actually 25 cents each, which are the first two books in the Clone Wars Secret Mission series by Ryder Wyndham, who is, I think, one of the best Star Wars writers, who wrote outstanding books in the young adult world of Star Wars for Scholastic, and wrote the outstanding young adult Scholastic book that was the first in the, unfortunately, only 2-book long Indiana Jones series. So anytime I see his name on anything Lucasfilm related, I buy with confidence, and I'm also trying to pick up a copy of every pre-Disney expanded universe work, including the young adult books. So this is 2 steps closer. They actually had a nice James Bond edition that I wanted to add to my collection, and it was $1, so I'm weak. Amazing that this was $1 actually, because it is a more modern trade paperback. I've always wanted to get each of the James Bond novels and continuation novels in a really good hardcover edition, and then a really good paperback edition to have on the go. It's the one thing where I've always specifically, really ever since I was a kid, wanted to have both the hardcover and primary paperback edition. And so they had a rather nice condition copy of Solo in trade paperback. So this has the same design aesthetic as the really striking hardcover, but where that was gold, black and white, and reflective, the paperback, as you can see, is sort of blue, metallic, teal, black and white. It's still got the full reflective sheen. It's in rather nice shape. There's no damage on the spine. The rear cover is lovely, and it's I think one of the most attention-grabbing of the modern continuation novel covers, whether in the hardcover gold version or this paperback metallic teal version. It's, of course, a standard trade paperback, so it's going to be the traditional size, but this is a relatively long novel, so it's a thicker trade oversized paperback. Solo is one of the more modern continuation books that I just had the original first edition hardcover, and so it was one of the books that I didn't like to carry around when I was rereading it. So I did always want to pick up a paperback version if I found it for cheap, and well, this certainly was cheap enough. But if you thought we were done with series books, oh no, I managed to, over the course of 2 trips, hit a bit of a gold mine, because I've really been wanting to collect and read all of the Matt Helm series by Donald Hamilton. I have read the first book, Death of a Citizen, which was incredible. I think that's an outstanding book. And if all you know about Matt Helm are the famous Dean Martin films, you do not know the character at all, because as fun as those films are, they have nothing to do with Matt Helm. It's completely different. And Matt Helm of the books is really a forerunner of a great deal of what we think of in action spy fiction that is tough and gritty. In fact, there wouldn't be a lot of the spy genre of today without Matt Helm, and Matt Helm also led to, I think, a lot of what became popular in men's adventure fiction of the 70s and 80s. So I've been wanting to collect the rest of the series, and particularly wanted to get nicer vintage paperback editions, as they all have really striking artwork, and went through a variety of different print runs and reprints that look so much better than the unfortunately very generic modern reprints by Titan. Those are great reprints, don't get me wrong, I do have a couple of those, but the artwork is just really generic and just does not really properly convey the type of book experience you're going to get. So I had about a third of the series, or at least, 5 or 6 of them. And so I just keep a list of the ones I'm missing, and once I pick up all the series, I plan on doing a full series read through. But at McKay's, they suddenly had a whole bunch that got traded in, and I picked out the ones that were in good condition, and then my next visit, they had even more. So in one fell swoop, I managed to get a big chunk of the series for dirt cheap. And when you look at eBay prices of trying to get just lots of them to build a vintage collection, it adds up pretty fast. So it really helped finding them this way. So they had this wonderful vintage gold medal edition of Book 2, The Wrecking Crew. And this era of the books has such a nice mixture of vintage art styles, and it just has that wonderful gritty flavor. The spine's in pretty good shape. And then I love the confidential file design of the rear, plus the artist rendering of the author. Here's the ambushers in the same style as another gold medal paperback. Great artwork, nice spine, and similar rear aesthetic, but of course now they've added Dean Martin's Mannhelm to further confuse matters, so it sort of makes this a bit of a movie tie-in. Here's the Ravagers in the later updated style with unique artwork and looking like it's coming out of the barrel of a gun. Similar spine and rear cover with author photo. There's a nice copy of the Devastators in the earlier style. Really lovely cover, great condition spine, and rear. Here's the Betrayers in the sort of in-between style of mixing the two cover design elements. So you'll see a lot of books with this type of layout branding. Nice spine and the rear cover. Here's the Interlopers in the earlier gold medal style. Spine and rear. Here's the Intimidators with great artwork. Solid spine and rear cover. Here's the Retaliators with updated cover that goes full 70s in its rendering of Mannhelm there. Spine, rear cover. Here's the Terrorizers in the later Fawcett design on a nice silver cover. Solid enough spine, similar rear cover. And then the last two from later in the series with the updated, modernized artwork, which is still quite lovely and very nice for a men's adventure book. So here's the Infiltrators. And nicely, at this point, they finally started putting the number of the book on the spine. So this is Mannhelm 21, and it's in pretty solid shape. And then the last is book 22, which is the Detonators. Again, pretty nice artwork, very solid condition overall. Some creasing in the spine, but it's still solid and nicely puts the number. And then there's the rear cover. So now with this find of very affordable copies, I do actually have most of the series in a mixture of vintage paperback editions and the Titan reprints. So I strongly recommend the Mannhelm series, especially Death of a Citizen, if you haven't read it. But you will then have to decide if you just want to stick with the modern reprints or do like I'm doing and try to pick up the vintage, much more interesting looking paperback editions. Now to talk further about some men's adventure series paperbacks and other related books. I've found myself getting more and more into the world of men's adventure series of the 70s, particularly because I got interested in The Destroyer after seeing the Remo Williams film. And of course, most of them were in the wake of the massive success of the Executioner books, also known as the Mac Bolan books, which ran for a great number of years into the 80s, 90s, and beyond. And of course, you saw all sorts of different series come out that were either derivatives of some of the more famous best-selling series or a series that struck out on their own or tried different genres. Some would move into science fiction, some would move into fantasy. It was just a whole variety of different things. And if you're like me and you love pulp fiction and you're looking for gritty action and adventure, there's nothing quite like a men's adventure book from this sort of golden age period of the 70s, 80s, and 90s to really scratch that particular itch. Some are, of course, better than others, and half the fun is just trying everything you can and weeding out the good ones from the bad and also laughing at some of the silly moments in the bad ones. It's actually quite fun, and it's a nice palate cleanser in between, reading really heavy books or biographies or other things you might normally do. So to go through some of these, as I did wind up picking up a bunch, which will be quite clear in just a moment, McKay's will quite frequently price a lot of these very low, like some of their Westerns, which is why I'm able to give some a try, as when a book is a quarter or 15 cents or 50 cents, then I basically have a rule there. If it's less than $1, I'll probably get it. If it's less than 75 cents, or I'll definitely get it. And if it's less than 50 cents, then there's just no question. It goes in the basket, because whether you like it or not, you're at least going to get your money's worth for a good condition paperback that was 50 cents or less. So in terms of the sort of men's adventure realm and different series, I decided to try this book in the Expediter series, as it looked quite interesting enough, and the paperback was in perfect condition. So this is book 10 in
John Eagle Expediter.
This book is entitled The Holocaust Auction. And I have to trailer voice all of these. I mean, that's what trailer voice is made for, doing the movie trailer hype voice and getting that
really gritty flavor in your voice.
And I even like looking at the blurbs, it's like, it's just, why not? So I decided to give this a try. And even some of the other titles look interesting. Like, book 1 is
Needles of Death.
So how can you go wrong with a book called that? But you can see the condition is excellent. It's a pyramid book with green edge pages, but it was just in perfect shape for a few cents, so I figured I would give this series a try. They had a later book in the Mac Bolan rebranded series of The Executioner. I have a couple Executioners that I picked up. I've not yet read one, as I did want to at least try to read something from the early part of the series, but occasionally when I find one like this that's at McKay's for a quarter or less, I decided to just go ahead and pick it up. So they had this one from 1995, which is entitled
Stalk Line.
And the cover, it looks, wonderfully 90s action adventure, and it very much looks like stuff you could have seen in an action movie in 1995, so it feels very era appropriate. But I just figured I'd pick this up, as I do plan on reading some of the Executioner series, and it's not like you're going to find good condition copies again for less than a quarter every day, so when you see things that cheap, you just can't say no. Now this one is going into science fiction, as it is a post-apocalyptic series. But I've been curious about this because the author, David Robbins, is the author of the excellent Wilderness series, which is, of course, a Western series, but it's also a survivalist series and full of historical detail, and that series is excellent from the books that I've read. It's absolutely wonderful for history buffs and people who love Westerns that are basically set in mountain ranges or out in the West, in the country, and about surviving from not just day to day, but second to second against everything that is practically there to destroy you and kill you horribly. But that series is excellent, so I was curious about his Endworld series, which again is a post-apocalyptic science fiction action series, and this is a later double novel reprinting, so it's actually got 2 books in one. I'd never actually seen this series in the wild, or if I saw it, I didn't know what it was at the time. But since this is one of the later double novel reprints, I figured I might as well give this a try. Now, speaking of series that spun off from The Executioner, Pinnacle Books, who was the publisher, had a number of series. The Executioner was their primary one. They also published The Destroyer and other series, including The Penetrator, which was very much in the vein of the Executioner books and lasted for a good number of titles. I think it's just around 50 books or so in the series. It alternated between 2 authors, so they literally would alternate where one author wrote all of the even-numbered books and one author wrote all of the odd-numbered books. It's not a series you see talked about a lot. The reception of it, if you look up reviews or modern reviews, it's sort of hit or miss depending on each book and what each person thinks of this series. You've got a lone individual hero who is essentially on a one-man war against crime wherever he finds it, and he's gotten a sort of special money fund set up at a secret base of sorts where his kind of support staff is. So it does have some elements of classical pulp fiction heroes from the pulp magazines. And I've now read 2 books in the series that were actually rather interesting and solid enough, so it made me curious about some of the others. And I thought, well, I'll read some of them if I come across books for cheap. These were fun enough diversions, on breaks at work or things like that. And some of the titles are just wonderfully pulpy and cheesy as heck, and even some of the cover art designs are rather nice. But McKay's all of a sudden had a ton of really solid condition copies for less than $1 each. Actually, these were 75 cents or less each. So if I hadn't overdone it already, I might have overdone it some more. So of the Penetrator series, which is also just funny to say, especially in trailer voice,
the Penetrator.
You would think that the title is just one giant sexual illusion and you immediately kind of laugh at the title. But interestingly, at least in the ones I've read, that's not the case at all. The Penetrator is just referring to the character Mark Harden's ability to literally penetrate anywhere as a penetration agent, his ability to slip into areas unnoticed, whether it's using slight disguises, but typically his ability to bluff his way into areas is second to none. So that's where the title comes from. Also, he leaves a calling card of an arrowhead and becomes a sort of folk hero on and off when the various news stories report, corrupt cops or mob bosses or different criminals are busted or killed by the Penetrator because they find his calling card. Additionally, again, at least in the books I've read, he does not like to take lives unless absolutely necessary and will not do anything to harm or kill innocent civilians. So that is nice to see. In addition to the occasional sex scene being very, very tasteful and sort of done out of the way. It's not a primary focus of the books, at least, again, in the 2 that I've read. So there are some things to recommend it for, and it's kind of fun digging through things like this, even if the quality can vary. So book 2,
Blood on the Strip,
which of course is a Vegas set story. And here you see the cover artwork design that is on pretty much all the series. I do think the artwork is actually rather nice and striking, very colorful and bold. So, it definitely is eye-catching. And as you can see, the condition on these is really great overall for 1970s books. So I just couldn't resist. Here's
Hijacking Manhattan.
And then the titles frequently are just so wonderfully cheesy that you cannot resist. So book 5 is
Mardi Gras Massacre.
Book 7,
Baja Banditos.
It's just too good for words. It's so wonderfully cheesy in the best sorts of ways. And even though the art is stylized, it is rather nice and attention-grabbing. So it very much gives you the flavor of the book you're going to get. And it just even has wonderful hype lines. And most of these are in really excellent condition, so I couldn't believe they were so cheap. I guess somebody traded in a whole collection because all of a sudden there were a stack of Penetrators, and I just saw that and was like, well, I never thought I'd see this many Penetrators at once. And it's just fun saying the word because, again, everybody immediately thinks of one thing when you say
the Penetrator,
even though that's not what the books are actually about. Here's book 16,
Deep Sea Shootout.
Book 19 has the hype of over 1.5 million copies sold of this series, and the title is the absolutely cheesy as heck, you gotta love it,
Panama Power Play.
It's like, how many hard P's can we get in the title? Let's have all 3 words. Here is
The Supergun Mission.
Book 21. Book 23,
Divine Death.
with a title like that, how can you resist? Book 25 keeps the death theme, of course, with
Floating Death.
Book 28,
The Sky High Betrayers.
and not only does it have a pure men's action book cover, but I guess this book is also going to involve whales, so I'm really curious because I didn't expect there to be a whale on the cover of one of these. Book 29,
Aryan Onslaught.
and of course this will obviously have some sort of post-World War II Nazi villains, and I gotta say the artwork, I love this shirt being such a bold yellow and red striped shirt. It stands out so much, and it looks unintentionally hilarious while he's blazing away with a machine gun. Now, this book is the primary reason why I decided to just go ahead and pick up all of these, because I looked at the cover, I looked at the plot description, and looked at the publication date. And everything about this book seems to suggest that somebody watched Moonraker in theaters and tried to hurry up and do some sort of ripoff of some of the plot elements. So, book 33 is
Satellite Slaughter.
which is just a wonderfully hysterical, cheesy title that I meant that I wanted to read it anyway, but this was released in 1979 after Moonraker came out, so it seems clearly obvious that somebody decided to take Mark Harden
Into space.
so, being such a fan of Moonraker, this just made it irresistible even more. Book 35 is
Black Massacre.
And not only do you have the hero trying to do an awkward karate chop while it looks like he's got something in his eye, while also holding a Mauser pistol, the plot seems absolutely ludicrous because apparently it is a deranged scientist who made a super contagious version of sickle cell anemia or something. It seemed absolutely bizarre, so I was just picking up all the penetrators they had, so I'm sure this will be completely wacky. Book 36,
Deadly Silence.
39 has a wonderful cheesy title.
Cruise into Chaos.
With a title like that, you've got to give it a try, and the artwork is pretty solid as well. I think book 42 has the best artwork overall of all of these because it just screams action and adventure. So book 42 on this super bold yellow background is
Inca Gold Hijack.
So you've got obviously lost ink and treasure. You've got explosions. You've got bodies flying in the flames. You've got guys seeming to rob a truck, almost with a Raiders of the Lost Ark flavor, which is probably what they were going for. You've got man and woman in embrace of sorts, and you've got either the hero or the villain in action pose wielding a hook like that. So that's just that was irresistible, and the condition of this is practically perfect. So I couldn't say no. Book 43 has the similar design and another irresistible title.
Rampage in Rio.
So I presume this is going to have some fun and explosions in Brazil. And then there's one more. This one is the later series of reprints where they did, I think, 3 of these. They are double novel reprints later in the 1980s. It seems like they were going to try and repackage and resell the series. But they only did 3 of them, and they're seemingly much harder to find than the original printings. But these were done by Leisure Books, who did a lot of the adult westerns of the time, and would do this same thing of packaging doubles like what we saw earlier on the Endworld double. But the artwork on these, oh my God. Not only did they rework the logo to make it look unbelievably even more cheesy, and these really make it look like what you actually think the penetrator means, particularly with this arrow, because of what they did to the actual design of it and the orientation particularly. But the artwork, it speaks for itself. This is some of the most hilariously bad, so bad it's genius art I've ever seen in my life. So this is 2 books in the series. One is one of the ones I actually already had and have read in the original edition, but I didn't think I would stumble across any of these hilarious double novel covers. So they had this on the shelf. It was a couple cents, so I bought this book for the cover, I'll admit it, but when you see the cover, you will understand why. So the double novel Leisure Books version of the books Tokyo Purple and Northwest Contract looks like this. Let's just take it in for a moment. First of all, the Penetrator logo is now done in this sort of metal chrome look, and it's in the arrow that is pointing straight up, so that right there, that's certainly got the phallic imagery that people think of with the silly title. But then you just look at the art. I mean, the detail is great. It wouldn't be so hilariously bad if it was not for the facial expression. I cannot look at this and take it seriously. It's just... it's so much all at once. And it is so purely men's action novels that it's so cheesy. It becomes gloriously bad. And then, of course, you've got a beautiful scantily clad woman. You've got what looks like the streets of Tokyo. And then what looks like a samurai or a ninja about to cut the hero's head off. So, it's got nice detail, nice color, nice action elements. So it's just that facial expression. I can't get over it. So as I said, Leisure Books did a couple of these. All of them have this design where the art is squished over to the side, and the other artwork is the same thing, where the color and detail is actually quite good, but the faces and the facial expressions, they're just so pure generic and so hilariously bland, yet also hysterically goofy, that these are terrible covers that become genius and great in their own right. So I couldn't resist. Again, I just got this for the cover. It was like, I think this was like 35 cents. So yeah, I could not resist. So as you can see, I may have gotten carried away a bit on the Penetrator, but in for a penny, in for a pound, I guess. And I'd literally only spent pennies on these, as none was more expensive than 75 cents. And again, I had trade credit. That's a dangerous thing at McKay's. No store's trade credit will ever burn in your pocket faster than it does at McKay's. Now to move on to Westerns that I picked up. This is, of course, the BookTube month event of June on the Range, where everybody is reading Westerns. And so there's a number of Westerns that I've set aside that I want to read in this month. And I've also become fascinated by the whole explosion of the adult Western in popularity in the 80s, 90s, and into the 2000s. It did start in the 70s, roughly, along with the explosion of men's action and adventure paperback series, but it was really the 1980s where it went stratospheric, particularly around several main series. So I've gotten hooked on some of those, and I wanted to read a bunch more. They're typically very cheap, so that's why I've tried them in the first place. So I wanted to pick up some Westerns for June to then read and talk about for June on the Range. However, I was going to McKay's on 2 different occasions in the same month, so that meant I didn't just get a few Westerns, I got a lot of Westerns, and they were very inexpensive. I'm weak. To start with, some classic westerns and some that I really wanted to read. I did not know until recently that Richard Matheson, the legendary author of I Am Legend and The Shrinking Man and several Twilight Zone episodes, one of my favorite writers, actually did write westerns at some points. And his two primary western novels are the ones I really wanted to find. And they actually were reprinted in a single paperback. So this is a reprint bringing together Journal of the Gun Years and The Gunfight. And Matheson actually won the Spur Award for Best Western of that year for Journal of the Gun Years. So I really have been wanting to read that, and I was so happy to find this modern, oversized paperback reprint of both books in one. It's got a little wear, but it's still in perfectly fine shape, and it was only $1.25, so I was really happy to find this. I've never read much of Zane Grey or Louis L'Amour, so I have wanted to correct that. They, of course, had a ton of Grey and L'Amour paperbacks and all sorts of different editions, so it's really hard to know where to start. So I just, as usual, if something is in really good shape, and I try to gravitate towards the super cheap stuff, so I picked up the books that were 50 cents or 25 cents or less. And trust me, they actually do sell minty paperbacks for less than a quarter. I'm not kidding. So for Zane Grey, I picked up this nice, I believe, 1980s edition of The Border Legion with some really nice artwork. That's actually wraparound. Of course, there's a little fading on the spine, seemingly due from just being in sunlight on the bookshelf. But still, it's a really nice, interesting looking book with wraparound artwork and the really bold color. And I also picked up Rangers of the Lone Star, which is actually a reprinting of the Lone Star Ranger, but this is the author's original version from his manuscript, as the original printing apparently was heavily condensed and revised, particularly in the second half. So this is actually quite interesting and important for those reasons. And it's also a thicker paperback, and this was only a quarter. So not only was I interested about the story for a quarter, but when I actually read the information and realized that this was actually a restoration of a Zane Grey work, then it was doubly interesting. And then they had some unbelievably cheap L'Amour paperbacks. These were actually 5 or 10 cents each, so they're totally at random. So I picked up this nice edition of Over on the Dry Side with this lovely artwork. And again, it's in really great shape. I can't believe it was this cheap. Here's a nice edition of Guns of the Timberlands with a beautiful cover with some slight wear, but otherwise perfectly fine. Here's the first Fast Straw with a nice cover. It is price clipped, but again, for a couple cents, it's in perfectly fine shape. And then here is a copy of The Haunted Mesa with a nice, actually embossed paperback cover. Just some browning of the pages, but nothing terrible. Perfectly fine reading copy for 10 cents. Then for adult westerns and adult western series, I managed to pick up a number of books. For those who aren't aware, there were basically 4 series that ran for hundreds of books and for actually many decades, and actually lasted into the 2000s and some even into the 2010s and beyond. So they really formalized some of the concepts that were done in the Western book series that started in the 70s that were much grittier and much more action-filled, basically the books like the Edge series. But the 4 major series of adult westerns are the Long Arm series and then its spin-offs and derivatives, then the Slocum series, and that actually started as a book series published by Playboy before it transitioned over to Jove Books. Then there was the long-running Trailsman series, and I think most of the first 200 books in that series were by the original author before it then became an army of ghostwriters. And then most of all is the Gunsmith series, which has, once you count in all of the giant books and spin-offs, you're looking at about 500 books or so, all written by the same author, Robert Randisi, under the J.R. Roberts pseudonym. It is, for me, the best of the adult westerns and what got me hooked on them. And everyone I've read so far has been fantastic, in spite of having the inherent drawbacks of the adult western, which, for lack of a better term, the adult western, basically, it was designed and kind of marketed as romance books for dudes. So you have continual series covers piled with action and set pieces and pure pulp flavor and full-on heroism and stuff, and then peppered with gratuitous sex scenes that would either be not well done or overly described, or you'd have too many of them. So that's the sort of inherent drawback, but also amusing part of looking at adult westerns, because you've always got that factor, and it will pop up usually 2 or 3 times per book because it was publisher mandated. But there are still great Western experiences to be had in these adult Western series, so I think they're fascinating to look at, and some of them are absolutely excellent, and The Gunsmith is what I'm talking about in particular. I've read some of each series and enjoyed things about each of them, but The Gunsmith is the one that I would recommend to anyone, and you can read any of the books, because I've read like 15 or 20 of them now, and I can't stop because each one is outstanding. So I did manage to pick up number 100 in the Gunsmith series, which was a slight special edition. So they made the actual title and logo they fancy by giving it this metallic sheen, and otherwise it's in the standard design. So all of the covers for most of the series look like this, with a nice bit detailing events from the book. They're very straightforward. They are slim mass market paperbacks, but they all have matching spines. They're really nice to collect. All the Gunsmith stories and all adult westerns are typically very straightforward, no frills Western adventures, but at their best, like in the Gunsmith books, they're so wonderfully done that you get sucked into it on page 1, and the writing is so good that, in spite of the publisher mandated sex scenes shoved in everywhere, you can't put it down until you finish, and you feel like you've just sat through a fulfilling 90 to 100 minute Western or B-Western. So not only am I going to do a video on the adult Westerns that I've read for June on the Range, but I want to do an entire separate focus on the Gunsmith, because I think these are absolutely fantastic, and it's been the great surprise of digging further into Western series for me. They had 2 later books in the Slocum series, which lasted for, again, many decades, and so these were written by different ghostwriters. So this is under Jove, so they had books 233 and 254 in perfectly fine shape, and as you can see, it's the same design aesthetic, the white backgrounds, the simple, straightforward stories. They're all typically between 160 to 180 pages, sometimes a little longer, all straightforward adventures, and they all flow into one another. And with the other series, it depends on the strength of the ghostwriter and the plot setup, how much you're going to enjoy it. But it's basically supposed to be the similar experience. The funny thing about the Slocum series is, of course, once Jove Books took over, they very much tried to downplay the Slocum title, because I didn't think about it until somebody pointed it out, that it's obviously it can be read as a very sleazy name for a book series. And again, you have to remember that these started as Playboy books. Actually, Playboy had its own series of Western books. That just seems bizarre. But basically, Jove continued them and did it as an action Western series. From what I've read, I think I like the Trailsman second best of the 4 major series. So I do want to pick up various Trailsmen when I find them for cheap, as I've enjoyed the ones that I've read. But they actually had a big stack of them, and I just picked out the nice condition copies that were super cheap. So they had some of the early original printings, surprisingly. So this is book 3 in really nice shape, just has some of the original price sticker still on it. But as you can see, the artwork is very heavily inspired by Clint Eastwood, particularly that's got a lot of Josie Wales in it. And you'll notice a lot of Clint Eastwood film influence on these various books, as, of course, the gunsmith himself is named Clint Adams, and throughout the artwork of all of the books, you'll see tons of Eastwood looks and influence, as clearly visible here. But this is in really great shape, and I didn't expect to see the book 3 in the series in perfect shape. Then here's book 10 with the same design aesthetic and the same, very clearly somebody was copying the Outlaw Josie Wales look on the cover. The rest are all from much later in the series, so they had a different cover aesthetic, but all have actually rather nice artwork that goes for the painted Western imagery look, and all of them are actually referencing elements of the book. And you've always got some beautiful female figures somewhere on these covers, as that is a part of any adult Western series. So the condition varies, but again, they're all solid enough, and these were all well under $1. Then here's book 214 from later on, when they adjusted the design again. It's obviously much more modernized, but they did at least try to keep the painted look. Here's book 220. Book 230, 242, and what a title, Wyoming Whirlwind. So even the titles and the taglines have that wonderful, cheesy, gritty quality to them that I love in pulpy books. What have I done? Here's book 260.
Blood Wedding.
And this one has an absolutely glorious blurb tagline. I mean, I don't even have to say it. It's so good.
Near misses.
I love that one so much. I have to admit, that is pure gold right there. I also picked up one of the giant editions. So these would basically just be giant adventures. So like basically 2 books in one. So this is
New Mexico Nightmare.
I like that they gave this a sort of bronzed looking spine, but otherwise it's the same design and layout. And then from later, we have the different cover design for book 387,
Apache Vendetta.
But again, at least they tried to keep the painted aesthetic. The spine has been updated, and then there's the rear cover. And then the last 4 are different series and spin-offs that lasted for a while, and so I decided to try these because they were all a quarter or less, and I've been trying any adult Western or pulpy looking gritty action-packed Western I can just to get a feel for all of them. So this first one is a spin-off of the Long Arm series. It's the Lone Star series. This is book 121, and this is essentially the female-led spinoff of Long Arm, where instead of the lawman, you have Jessica Starbuck, who's also a bounty hunter of sorts, and she goes around the West righting wrongs with her brother-in-arms, Key, or Kai, which is just spelled K-I. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but he's a martial arts master who likes to also use throwing stars. So that combination in a Western setting just sounded fascinating and fun enough, so I figured I would give these a try as well. This is the last book of a 9-book series, also by Jove. It's credited as being from the creators of Long Arm, so they would use the series to be branding or marketing for other series. But this is the last book in the Bushwhackers series, which is apparently about 2 brothers in the post-Civil War period going around the West, having a series of misadventures, getting into all sorts of trouble and trying to right wrongs of their own. Here's another series credited as from the creators of Long Arm that Jove put out. And this already, I hope, shows you just how many adult Western books there were. It became a whole industry for a while. So every time I look at a bookstore or I look up something online, I find stuff I've never even heard of. So this is the Diamondback series. And it has this really nice cover with a painted look to it, nice overall design. And how can you resist an action Western where the guy is literally named Diamondback? Because he's fast and dangerous and as deadly as a rattlesnake. So, I mean, how can you say no? So not only do we have the number on the spine, but they've even gotten the rattlesnake on the spine, which is a nice touch. And I like the rear cover design as well. And then I found book 39 in the Stagecoach series, which is entitled Fort Verde. And what's nice about this is that each of the books isn't just numbered, it's actually station, as if it was the stagecoach stopping at each station. So book 39 is Station 39. The cover is actually quite nice. There's some really lovely artwork. Then you've got the characters on the bottom. So it looked interesting enough. I figured I'd give it a try. And again, when it's a paperback for a quarter that looks action-packed, I can't say no. And then lastly are the books that are not part of a series and I just picked up because they were either things I wanted to read or things that looked interesting, and all of these were in the bargain section, which is for paperbacks typically 50 cents or less. Most of them are a quarter. And then for hardbacks, it's $1.50 or less. So they've had some really interesting stuff in there. So I actually found this Scholastic novelization of Silent Running with the original poster artwork. So this is a nice little paperback that actually was getting kids to read the story of the really striking and very depressing science fiction classic. So I assume this is a junior novelization, but what's striking is it's actually got a photo section in the middle. So this was just a nice little book that I was not even really aware existed. And so it was 10 cents. I can't resist. They had book 2 in the Psyman series by Peter David. And I like to try and read anything that David wrote, as I've always enjoyed what he did with the Batman Forever novelization, which is still the best novelization I've ever read. He was, of course, famous for, writing a lot of Star Trek books, but primarily for being a preeminent comics writer for many years, and unfortunately passed away more recently. But I do try to read anything by Peter David, and even though this is book 2 in a series, it was in really nice shape and extremely cheap, so I picked it up too. Strikingly, they actually had one of Gene Hackman's published novels, so I picked up Pursuit. This is a solid condition paperback. Unfortunately, as you can see, the laminate on the cover is peeling, and that's actually because this is a print-on-demand paperback, and which I didn't really think of existing in terms of just mass market paperbacks, but sure enough, it's actually print-on-demand. But I have always been curious about reading Hackman's other works, both as a standalone author like this or the books that he co-authored. And this is apparently about a cop and trying to track down a serial killer. So I'm just really curious to read this and see what his writing is like for that type of thriller. This was a total curiosity pickup because it was a few cents, and it's got Brave New World in 1984 on the hype blurbs, so it's very obviously a dystopia story of sorts. So I picked up this striking looking paperback of The Sun Grows Cold, which is in perfect shape. The pages look fully intact, and it just looks like an interesting dystopia novel, so I figured I would give this a try as well. They had a solid paperback copy of Tainted Evidence by Robert Daly, who, of course, wrote Prince of the City, which was the basis of the masterpiece film that Sidney Lumet made in 1981. So when I saw Daly's name on this nice paperback with this fully embossed cover showing a broken gavel, that just drew my attention. So I figured I would try this out as well. And then last for paperbacks, they had the first book in the Aztec series by Gary Jennings, which I believe is historical fiction. I've seen these books before, but I don't really know anything about them. And this is a massive book. It's well over 1,000 pages. So the fact that it was like 10 cents is like, well, I don't know. It's just, it's basically 1,050 pages. So I figured I couldn't go wrong for 10 cents, even if I wound up not liking it. So this was really surprising that a book this long would not only be in good shape with its spine, but it was only 10 cents. And then last for McKay's, if you wouldn't believe it, I've got 2 more books. They had this in the film TV section. So this is a book on the films and career of Joseph Mankiewicz entitled Pictures Will Talk. It's an older film book back when they were writing nice film books, but also not charging an arm and a leg for them. So you can see the original list price was only $10. But I do really admire a lot of Mankiewicz's films and, of course, find his career fascinating to study. So I'm really curious to read this biography that's also seemingly film criticism as well. And it is over 400 pages, so it is substantial. And it was only 50 cents. McKay's knows my weakness. And then the last book from McKay's in the bargain section was, amazingly, a perfect condition copy of Le Carre's Legacy of Spies from 2017, which of course is the last George Smiley novel. So this is the original hardcover with dust jacket. Of course, this is a modern book that they printed a lot of copies, so it's not expensive on the used market, but, finding a perfect copy with dust jacket intact for less than $1. This is why McKay's will suck you in every time. It's dangerous for us book lovers. Oh, jeez, I can't even fit everything. What have I done? So what you see is the result of me going to McKay's twice in 1 month. There is a reason why I try to limit myself going in the store, as amazingly everything you see here behind me, in total, combining the 2 trips, cost less than $50. That's because I had trade credit. If I didn't, it would have been more like 75 or so, which is still absurdly cheap for the sheer volume of books that I picked up, not to mention the countless hours of reading material that is, plus everything was far underpriced in terms of what it sells for just in general eBay values. So that's why I always tell people, if they've never been to a McKay's before, you really have to check it out and just set aside the whole day to dig through the bookshelves, because you will simply be astonished at the treasures you'll find and how cheap they can be. But you do have to scrutinize, because they will price books anywhere from a nickel or 10 cents all the way up to full list price or more. So it's almost like a gigantic, seemingly never-ending physical media flea market where they will sell everything from books to musical instruments to movies across all formats to comics and collectibles, toys, and beyond. So that's why I call it the physical media black hole. Oh, come on. So you would think that that is plenty of books to carry me through for at least the rest of the year. But as I said at the start, I also visited our local half-price books once. I don't get out to that side of town all that often, and typically Half Price Books is a bit on the pricier side, but it's worth going to every once in a while because it's a nice layout, and they will also occasionally get really rare books and collectible books in, and sometimes they're actually priced well or very affordably, or will get marked down and put in the clearance section. So it's nice to visit there every once in a while. But when you have a McKay's in your town, most other bookstores simply cannot compare to the sheer volume of books they have and the incredible bargains they offer. So, as I've also said in this video, I've gotten into the Destroyer series, and I do enjoy reading those and how wild and wacky they can get. But finding physical copies of the older books in not just readable shape, but in good condition that, wasn't owned by a chain smoker or completely destroyed over the years, no pun intended, is very difficult. And going on eBay trying to find books in the series, again, especially the earlier books, condition is very key, and they can get quite expensive. Or just buying a lot of poor condition copies also can be quite a bit. There are, of course, modern reprints and ebooks, but they're full price and far more expensive than the vintage paperbacks are, and have really generic covers. So imagine my surprise when I walk into Half Price Books, and in the collectible section, there's a whole run of Destroyer books already in protective bags, and they weren't at the usual collectible book prices either. So I picked out everything that I was missing of those. And as you can see, it's quite a bit. So I overdid it again. Whoops. But I also haven't seen any early Destroyers in the wild for a long time, so they seemed rather plentiful when I started collecting the series, and then all of a sudden disappeared, and it's just the more modern ones that you find. So I did want to try to start collecting and reading specifically the ones primarily by the original authors first. And these were already bagged, and so that means that I don't have to actually buy protective bags for them, so that made them even more of a value. And almost all of them were $2. So here is a nice copy of book 11,
Kill or Cure,
with the original artwork. I mean, the condition of the pages is quite good. The condition of the spines on all of these is quite good. So I just couldn't believe these were all sitting there and they weren't at the usual collectible book prices. So I just decided to go ahead and pick up all of these. So I spent about $37 on these. It's more than I like to spend on books, but for books that are vintage and, relatively collectible, that you don't find every day in good shape, and they're already bagged, that's why I just bit the bullet, because I was just like, I'm not going to find these again in this shape, and I have been really wanting to read these, and I do collect the series now, so that's why I just went ahead. But, compare this stack to the gigantic wall you see behind me, that wasn't much more than that. So here's a nice copy of book 14,
Judgment Day.
I have the nice original artwork there in the corner, which is how the paperbacks were done at this time. The spine's in really nice shape. And then here is the rear cover. Here's
Oil Slick.
Just really nice condition, even though, as you can see, the books do have the very yellow pages common to the era, and one or two of these have a little bit of writing on them, but nothing major, and these are far better condition-wise than what you typically see for Destroyers, especially any of the first 50 books. So here's book 17,
Last War Dance.
And if you've never read a Destroyer, they get completely ridiculous. They are hysterical, wacky, satirical, very non-politically correct at times. And I always tell people the best way to describe them is imagine an action series that decided to actively satirize all elements of action series and has the tone and flavor of, really the closest comparison would probably be South Park. That's the sort of wacky, satirical feeling you get because these books try to make fun of everything. Here is book 18, Funny Money, which is a counterfeiting story that I've been wanting to read because the plot description just seemed completely wacky. as it's actually tied into a NASA project of all things. Book 21, Deadly Seeds. Again, it's just really striking finding so many of these in such good condition all at once. Here's book 24,
King's Curse.
Book 25,
Sweet Dreams.
And strikingly, this is basically a book that's an early virtual reality story, or at least that's the plot setup, so it seems perfect for the world of the Destroyer. Book 27,
The Last Temple,
is actually an upgrade copy because I do have this particular book and I've read it, but this copy was in much better condition for only $2. I'm, of course, putting my finger over the swastika, as this does involve villains who turn out to be former Nazis, and this is still during the time where publishers would just put the swastika on book covers and not really think about it at all. But this is actually a solid Destroyer entry if you're curious. Here's book 29,
The Final Death,
with a wonderful pulpy cover. Great spine, perfect rear cover, and goofy blurb title. Book 31,
The Headmen.
Book 35,
Last Call,
is the one that has the most wear, but outside of the cover and spine wear, it's otherwise solid, and this is still good condition for vintage Destroyer paperbacks, considering just how destroyed they are when you typically find them. Then we move into the era where the covers got updated to have the modernized Destroyer logo, so that's why they look a little bit different, but they keep the same aesthetic. So this is book 41,
Firing Line.
And they also made the color choices more bold. Book 42 is fittingly
Timberline.
Book 43,
Midnight Man.
Book 45,
Spoils of War.
Book 46,
Next of Kin,
which actually has the title and volume number embossed in a nice sort of bronze gold. Nice spine, and the rear cover. And then last is book 58,
Total Recall,
which is, of course, fun to see on a men's adventure vintage pulpy book cover long before the film ever existed. Got the spine and the rear cover. And so there you have my book haul for May 2026. As you can see, this is why I decided to do this in a video form. Typically, I pick up a few books here and there, and if I go to McKay's a lot, then I pick up a lot of books. And I do try to trade in things that I'm no longer interested in or am pretty much finished with. So anytime I go to one of the used bookstores, I try to bring something to trade in. Again, with at least with the hope that I'm freeing up some space and there's a sense of movement as some things come in, some things go out, so I'm not completely drowning in physical media. But that's the whole point of being a physical media collector, because you're just trying to amass a great library. And also, I cannot resist cheap books as long as they're interesting and in good condition. So that's another thing. My rule is always, if a book is less than $1 and it's in good shape, then just go ahead, because you're going to get at least enough value out of that experience, whether it's good or bad, and it's not like you're going to find that book again probably for as cheap of a price. And I am lucky enough to have several great used bookstore options, or stores that sell used books at cheap prices, and also various series that I collect. So it's fun to go in the stores regularly, and I try to always support local independent bookstores wherever possible. But this past month, I was able to go to the stores 3 times, and there was a ton of stuff. This is just some of the stuff that I looked at, and I got everything at an absurdly cheap price. So these were all bargains, and even adding in the half-price books Destroyer lot that I picked up, which are already all in protective plastic bags, I still spent significantly under $100 for everything you see behind me. So it will, of course, take me a while to read all of this in addition to everything that I'm currently reading. But I did find some really fantastic stuff for my series book collections. Most of all, the Red Top House on the Cliff was just a stunning surprise. And I'm always trying to, in these book hauls, not just pick up things I'm interested in, but I always do try to focus on best value for money because, like everybody, you have to stretch your dollar as far as you can, and nobody likes the feeling of not getting your money's worth. But I do also have to restrain myself, and this was actually still restraining myself because it could have been a lot worse in terms of walking out with a ton of books. But again, I did trade in stuff to try and free up space, so I did have trade credits, so some of this was actually free. So this is definitely far more of a book haul than I typically have, and that's why I decided to go over everything in video form, because this is just a massive amount that was absurdly cheap. So, as always, I hope my babblings about book hunting and book collecting has been at least somewhat fun and informative. Hopefully, this encourages you to check some of these series out or try some different things maybe you hadn't heard of before, or take some stuff off the shelf that you haven't read in a great number of years. Please do keep supporting your local independent bookstores who need all of your support. And as always, keep reading print books, and thank you ever so much for watching. I may have overdone it. Just a little bit, you know. But of course, minty cheap books. And the key phrase, as Mary Goodnight says in the Man with the Golden Gun film, I'm weak.